Hello, and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Tonight, we will be exploring three incredible stories from the Nehalem Tillamook Native Americans. The Tillamook are a Native American tribe from coastal Oregon. So many times, while researching stories regarding the unknown or the mysterious, I often find myself digging directly back to Native American folklore. Whether I be doing research on Bigfoot or Sasquatch, skinwalkers, or the Wendigo, all of these stories have roots deep in Native American folklore. Each of these three stories that we're going to be reading tonight are simply titled Wild Man. So as we go through these three stories, I would ask you to ask yourself a question. What could this wild man possibly be that these stories are describing? So, with that being said, let's dive into the first of our three stories from Nehalem Tillamook lore. Now, just as a preface to this first story in particular, I'm going to be reading these stories just as they are written. I'm not going to embellish or change them, and there is a certain amount of brutality in this first story, so I thought I would give you a listener discretion before going on. So let's begin our first story. This happened at Nehalem. One man who had two wives would live far up Nehalem River. He was living there that winter. Other people moved back to the ocean after the fishing season, but this man and his two wives were going to remain there all winter. There was snow on the ground. Once in a while he would go fishing for steelheads. He would spear them so they could have fresh salmon. One night he was sleeping with the wife who was childless. The woman with a baby was sleeping on the other side of the fire with her baby. He awoke in the night. He heard that baby crying and crying. He called to his wife, "Say, wake up, the baby is crying." There was not a sound from her. He arose. He built up the fire, which had gone almost out. He put pitchwood in the fire and made it light. A large hole was torn in the house. One entire corner of the building was gone. He walked to his wife's bed. No wife. Just that little baby was there. He took his baby. He carried it over to the other woman. He said, "Something must have happened." He lit a pitchwood flare and he went outside to look for tracks near that torn out corner of the house. In the snow, he saw tracks made by feet that long, about 3 feet. Then he knew it was not an ordinary person. He went back in the house. He said, "You know, that other wife of mine must be dead. I fear she has been killed. That was a wicked being. That wild man has come and taken her. I saw his tracks. I do not care if I get killed. If I do not return, you must put everything you want in the canoe and go down river. Go down where there are many, many people." He was not afraid, perhaps because he knew Wild Man. Perhaps he had his power. He prepared his flare. He spliced together long pitchwood pieces so it would not burn out too quickly. He made 2 long flares, and he started out with one of them burning. He took all of his arrows. He carried his bow. He started out. He could follow those tracks easily. At some time he put out the light on his pitchwood. He could see a light ahead, a very bright light. Wild Man had built a fire. The man arrived near there. There he saw Wild Man, who had built a very large fire and was sitting by it. He had cut a huge huckleberry bush and had impaled that woman on it. He was cooking her by his fire. The husband thought, I will watch him for a while and see what he does. After a while, Wild Man turned that stake around so as to cook his meal evenly. He glanced at the front. The woman's breasts were cooked. Wild Man reached over, pulled off one breast, and put it in his mouth. As he reached across, the husband shot Wild Man under that arm. Wild Man brushed the arrow off, saying, Ouch! Sparks are falling on me. Here I am merely eating my fresh meat, and a spark had to light on my body. He brushed that arrow off. He arose and he walked around, reaching for the other breast with his other hand. In the same manner, the man shot him again under the other arm. Again, Wild Man brushed the arrow off. Ouch! Sparks flew at me. He ate the second breast. The husband continued shooting at him. Suddenly, Wild Man stood up. He ran uphill a short distance and stopped. It did not sound as if he had kept on going. The man went to the fire. He got his wife and pulled that stake. He carried her home. She was completely cooked. He reached home and told his other wife, Well, I found him. He was cooking her on a stake when I got there. They would not go back to bed. They were frightened almost to death. They remained sitting up. Daylight came. The man said, I heard him run, but very soon the noise of his running ceased. It did not sound as if he went any farther. I am going to look now. He went out and found that fireplace. He followed the bloody tracks that showed up clearly in the snow. After he had gone a short distance, he came upon Wild Man, laying on his face dead. He had killed him with his arrows. He observed that Wild Man looked like a person, except that he was capable of many more activities than an ordinary person. He had an animal hide as a quiver, but he also used a club to hunt with. Sometimes he used a walking cane. The man took Wild Man's quiver. He allowed Wild Man to remain lying there on top of the ground. When he arrived at home with that quiver, he and his wife looked inside. There were many arrows in it, and all kinds of animal bones. Just as if Wild Man had saved those bones for souvenirs. Perhaps they were his lucky pieces. The man kept them. They gave him luck indeed. Wherever he happened to live, he had to go merely a few steps into the woods in order to kill elk. No one else would get them that easily. The man and his wife made ready. They put everything that they possessed in their canoe, as well as that dead wife's body. They came down the river. Everyone was afraid of that place upriver, so no one made a camp there after that. That is a real happening. That was why no one wanted to live anywhere without neighbors. So that's the conclusion of the first story of this Wild Man. So let's move right into our second story, also titled Wild Man. People were drying fish up on the Nehalem River. They heard a noise. The brush was crackling loud. They knew that no wind nor common animal could be making that kind of noise. They hurried into their canoes and crossed over to the other side of the river. They forgot their little dog. They crawled into a place and lay down to listen. Their little dog barked and barked, then suddenly quit. Then they heard a terrific noise as Wild Man knocked down one side of the house. Then he must have gone back into the woods. They could not sleep, they were so frightened, although they knew it was such a deep river that he would be unable to wade it. The next day, one fellow went over in a canoe to have a look. One side of that large house where they had dried fish was smashed to pieces. and the dog was lying there dead. And Wild Man's huge tracks were all around. That fellow came back and told the people, "Yes, I saw his tracks." They put all their belongings and their fish in canoes and left that place for good. They would not live there any more for fear he might come again. After that, no one would camp on that side of the river. That really happened. So that concludes the second story of this wild man. So let's carry on to our third story, again, titled Wild Man. It begins, there must have been a whole tribe of wild men, because they were always some around. A Nehalem man was not married. He would go hunting and permit the married people to have the meat he got. One summer he killed an elk and he saved the blood. He took the elk's bladder and filled it with the blood. He made a camp near there. He placed that bladder of blood near his feet, lay down, and went to sleep. Wild Man came and helped himself to the elk meat. The man awoke. He was too warm. He was sweating. "Goodness, what is the matter?" he asked himself, looking about. It was like daylight. There was such a great fire burning there. Wild Man had placed large pieces of bark between the man and the fire, so the man would not get too hot while he slept. You see, he treated that fellow well. When he spoke to him, Wild Man called the man my nephew. The man awoke to see Wild Man, that extremely large man, sitting by the fire. He had the fat ribs and the front of that elk on a stick, roasting them by the fire. He said, "This is how I am getting to be. I am getting to always be on the bum these days. I travel all over. I cannot find any elk. I took your elk, dear nephew. I took your elk meat." That man stretched himself. He had forgotten about that bag of blood. He kicked it with his feet, causing it to make a noise. Wild Man looked around. He said, "It sounds as if a storm were coming." And then in parentheses it says, "A wild man does not like to travel when it's storming." When the man discovered that Wild Man was afraid of that noise, he kept kicking that bladder of blood. He said, "Yes, a storm is coming." Wild Man asked, "My dear nephew, would you tell me the best place to run to?" That man showed Wild Man a high bluff. "Over in that direction is a good place to run," he told him. Wild Man started out running. Soon the man heard him fall over that bluff. The man did not go back to sleep any more that night. In the morning he went to look. There, Wild Man lay, far down at the foot of the bluff. He went around by a better route and climbed down to see the body. He took Wild Man's quiver. He left Wild Man lying there. Then he became afraid, so he made ready and returned from the woods, taking as much meat as he could carry. He would not permit anyone to go bring in the rest of the elk. He said, "Wild Man found me." He jumped over the bluff. He too found all kinds of bones in that quiver. They must have been lucky pieces, because elk would come down from the mountain for him. And only he could get sea lions on the rocks. This is a real happening. That is the conclusion of the third story. So now let's reconsider that question that we looked at before we started the stories. What could this wild man possibly be? Picture yourself in place of these Native Americans. What kind of creature or mystery would inspire such tales? These tales of brutality, strength, wisdom. What could possibly have inspired these? So I would really like to get your thoughts on this. So leave a comment. What do you think could be the inspiration of the wild man stories and these Nehalem Tillamook Native American stories. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So, with these 3 stories coming to an end, that concludes our time here tonight at Bigfoot Lake. I appreciate you all joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stories. We hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next time on Bigfoot Lake.